I don't care if people believe me or not. I write my experiences for your entertainment. Believe what you will. This happened over 10 years ago. I never had the best relationship with my dad. So when it come to having to move in with him, I was dreading it. Now, to make matters worse, my sister, we'll call her Jane, gave me a heads up about the room I was going to stay in. I will add here it was an old Victorian house with than I ever was, so she had stayed with him whilst I stayed with my mum. She told me during her stay a few weird things happened to her, but there was one notably unsettling story. Jane was sat downstairs with the dog when, all of a sudden, the CD player turned on upstairs in the room. She didn't think much of it and went up and turned it off. Upon coming down the stairs, the dog was snarling and backing away from the seat next to where she had been sat. Jane calmed the dog and reassured it, and just as the dog settled, the CD player turned on again. This time she runs up, turns it off and unplugs it from the wall. Understandably, she is anxious and unsettled at this point and calls her friend to see if she could go there. And all of a sudden the CD player turned on full blast and she ran out the house with the dog. She then proceeded to stay with her friend for a while after this. Obviously, with this knowledge, I was not particularly thrilled about my new accommodation, but there wasn't a lot I could do as I was still relatively young. When I moved in, the relationship with my dad went straight to the way it always was. Physical and verbal abuse and just generally trying to avoid him. Which means I end up in the room a lot. Some small things that happened were cupboard doors opening by themselves. The light bulb fell from the socket and smashed on my head, and things generally moving. Places from where I'd put them. I even watched a door handle turn and the door open itself. But the time that got me was one time I was sat playing games in my room and there was a loud bang. I got up to go check. At the same time, my dad from downstairs come up to investigate. The attic hatch had swung open and hit the wall and put a big dent into the wall. Naturally, my dad goes crazy at me, despite me trying to explain the ceiling is over 7 foot high and I was in my room. The next day I climbed up on the banister and pushed the hatch up and let it swing down. After all, the wall was already dented, and I wanted to understand what had happened, as there is no way it just fell. And even doing this, it doesn't hit the wall at all. This freaked me out. After this, I always got scared going under the attic, until one day I was home alone brushing my teeth in the bathroom. The attic is in between the room I stayed in and the bathroom. While I was in the bathroom, I literally watched the hatch swing open and smash the wall again, and I literally just booked it. I think I must have missed half the stairs running down, and I left the house. After this, I ended up also staying elsewhere and never going back to that house. Unfortunately, it seemed for a few years wherever I went something would happen, but eventually things settled, and there hasn't been any spooky stuff for a couple years now. I can't believe I actually saw a ghost the other night with my own eyes. I was going to the store about 10:30 p.m. My car overheats. I live in a very rural area. Pull over, let it cool down, check radiator and drive a couple more miles and it overheats again. At this point, it's after midnight, and I am not too far away from my house, 1.5-mile walk. It's a pretty night, just a little chilly, so I decide instead of risking hurting the car, I'll just hoof it. The road I live on is a very rough, mountainous ord made of dirt, and I was not far from it, so I strike out not too worried, because I knew why the car overheated and I needed a walk anyway. I walked down the 2LN highway, then 2-3 or so down my dirt road. I'm moving a good clip. There was some moonlight enough to where I didn't need a flashlight anyway. I see something coming up a neighbor's driveway and hear faint steps on the gravel on my left. It's walking right up that driveway out towards the main road where I'm walking past. My first thought is shit. One of my neighbors heard or saw me walking down our road in the middle of the night and think I'm messing around, casing houses or something. At any moment I expect to see a flashlight, a gun, or a combination of the two, and some questions. Then I realize what I am seeing. There is a man walking towards me, except I can see through him. It kind of was like Predator in the beginning, where it took on the texture of the surrounding trees, but as it got closer it was very much a man, a little bigger build but the same height, wearing what I Thought was a plaid lumberjack-style shirt and denim pants, and he had longer hair, a la Theo Vaughn kinda. He walks out of the driveway within about 30 feet, and he comes alongside me and walks beside me for about 100 to 150 ft, 30 ft to my left along this split rail wooden fence. When I get to the end of that fence, he stops and puts his arm up on it and just stares at me. I did not say a word. I just kept walking, the hair on my head standing on end. I mean, I saw the man. I also saw through him. It was just like when they beam people up in Star Trek when they look faint. It was like he was 40% solid maybe, and only 30 ft away for a good 1-2 minutes straight. He deliberately came down that driveway to meet me on the road and walk beside me watching me. The look he had was sad, or like he wanted to tell me something but couldn't find his voice. So I keep walking and I'm terrified to look back. And I just keep saying to myself, WTF, WTF. WTF, did that just really happen? I was never scared really, just more in disbelief of what I had witnessed. I began to get really disturbed by it as I got closer to my house, it creeping me out more and more. So the next morning I'm in the kitchen telling my dad about it. How I've always believed in aliens and UFOs, but never ghosts. Not in the slightest, and he's looking at me skeptically for sure, but then he wanted to know exactly where. Suddenly it dawns on me I remember him telling me about a year ago, before I moved back in, that one of the neighbors we barely knew had killed himself in that house down the driveway, where that split rail fence is. I have tears in my eyes, and my hair is standing on end, and my nerves are electrified writing this now. Up until the other night, I thought all paranormal activity was outright BS. Then I saw a ghost. Like, I'll take a polygraph. God strike me dead if I am lying. Saw a ghost with my own sober eyes. I can only guess it was that unfortunate soul. I have been shaken ever since. Please feel free to share any thoughts. I am still wigged out. I never imagined that growing old together would feel like this. 3 people in one bed, the air heavy with the smell of ointment and age. Every night I lie on the edge of the mattress pretending to sleep, while my wife's 90-year-old mother curls between us like a frightened child. My wife says it comforts her, that her mother's mind has turned backward through the years. She thinks I'm her own mother, she whispers, as if that explains everything. The old woman clings to her at night, murmuring stories from half a century ago. At first I argued. I told my wife we should find proper care, that her mother needed professionals, not a shared blanket. But my wife's eyes filled with tears and I stopped. The house went silent, except for the ticking clock and the rasp of the old woman's breath. The first time I heard the phrase, I thought I misheard it. The boring man, the old woman said softly, half asleep. Who's that? My wife asked. The one who comes when the lights go off. He makes everything quiet. We laughed then, a nervous kind of laugh. Dementia, we told ourselves. Just words from a mind unraveling. But the phrase stayed. Every night she whispered it. Sometimes she giggled. Sometimes she begged us to close our eyes when he came. I started sleeping in the guest room, but even there the house never felt empty. The ceiling creaked like someone pacing above me. The hallway light flickered without reason. Once I woke up with the certainty that someone was standing in the doorway. Just the shape of a man, motionless, as if waiting for me to blink. When I turned on the lamp, there was nothing there, only the faint smell of rain, though the windows were shut. One night my wife shook me awake. She's calling for me again, she whispered. Her mother's voice drifted down the hall, thin, frightened, the same words over and over. He's here. The boring man is here. I followed her to our room. The old woman was sitting up, staring at the wall. Her pupils were wide, almost black. He says we're all going to see, she said. See what? I asked before I could stop myself. Her mouth trembled. What's underneath the time? Then she lay back down and fell asleep as if nothing had happened. The next morning, she didn't remember a thing. My wife brushed it off, but I couldn't. The phrase circled my head all day, underneath the time. That night I stayed awake long after they'd both fallen asleep. The room was dark except for a slit of moonlight. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about how still the world can get when everyone else is dreaming. Then, slowly, the ticking of the bedside clock began to drag. The second hand moved, then hesitated, then moved again. The air thickened, like the whole room was underwater. And then I saw him. A man, if you could call him that, stood at the foot of the bed. Not solid, not ghostly, but something in between. His face was almost featureless, like a painting that someone had tried to erase. His eyes were open but blank, and where his mouth should have been, there was only a faint hollow. He didn't move. He simply existed, and with him came a silence so deep that my heartbeat felt deafening. I tried to call out to my wife, but my voice caught in my throat. The boring man tilted his head as if curious, and suddenly the moonlight bent around him, stretching like liquid, and then everything stopped. The clock froze. The air itself seemed to fold inward. For one impossible instant I felt as though the room was a photograph, and someone had lifted me out of it to show me the edges of the frame. When motion returned, it did so all at once. The clock's tick snapped back into rhythm. The curtain moved in a breeze that shouldn't have been there. My wife stirred beside me, mumbling in her sleep, and the space at the end of the bed was empty again. For a while I convinced myself I'd dreamed it. Exhaustion, stress, too much worry over the old woman. But the next morning, the air in the bedroom felt wrong. The smell of dust and something faintly metallic hung there, as if a thunderstorm had passed through in the night. The old woman sat at the table, tracing circles on the wood with her finger. "He showed you too," she said when I walked in. My stomach turned. "What did you say?" She smiled without looking up. "He likes when people stay awake." My wife poured her tea, pretending not to hear. Her hands were trembling. That afternoon she admitted she'd been seeing things too, small things. The hallway stretching longer than it should, the shadows of 3 people in a room when only 2 stood there. She said it in a whisper, as though naming it might make it worse. "I think it's the stress," she told me. "Or maybe the house," I said. But deep down, both of us knew the house hadn't changed. Something else had. That night neither of us could sleep. The old woman had already crawled into the bed, curling against my wife like a child. I lay facing the ceiling, watching the dim pattern of light through the curtains. The ticking began again. That dragging sound. Slower, slower, until it stopped entirely. I sat up. The room was caught mid-motion. My wife's hair floated in the air as if underwater. The curtains were frozen in place. Everything shimmered slightly, like a heat mirage. Then came a sound, quiet but enormous, like distant thunder rolling through the bones of the world. He was there again, closer this time, the boring man. The shape of him pulsed faintly with each non-existent heartbeat. His eyes, or the absence of them, turned toward me. I felt an idea more than a voice press against my mind. "Look." And the ceiling dissolved. Above us wasn't sky or rafters, but layers of light, moving like enormous pages being turned. Each sheet revealed another version of our room, hundreds, thousands stacked like reflections in a hall of mirrors. In some I saw us asleep, in others gone entirely. In one the house was nothing but ash floating in darkness. My mind couldn't hold it. It felt as though he had opened something that wasn't meant to be opened. Then, as quickly as it began, everything folded back into itself. I was lying flat again. The clock ticked normally. The old woman whispered something in her sleep and smiled. I didn't tell my wife what I saw until the next day. When I did, she only nodded. "He showed me too," she said. "He said the quiet places are the real ones." From then on, time stopped in small pieces. A bird would freeze mid-flight outside the window. Steam from a kettle would hang in the air like glass. Sometimes the world skipped a second, and the same word came out of my mouth twice. The old woman began to hum a tune none of us knew. It was slow, circular, endless. One evening, after hours of silence, she turned to us and said, "He's almost finished showing you. When he's done, you won't need to move anymore." The way she said it made the skin on my neck prickle. The days blurred. Sometimes I woke to sunlight, sometimes to night, never sure which came first. The clocks in the house no longer agreed with each other. Some ran too fast, others not at all. The only constant was the humming, the tune the old woman carried on her lips like a secret she couldn't forget. I started to notice how sound itself seemed thinner. When I closed a door, the click came a second late. My own footsteps echoed like someone else was walking behind me. Every now and then, I'd catch my reflection in the window and see my mouth moving before I heard the words. My wife stopped pretending everything was normal. She moved slower, spoke less. Sometimes I'd find her sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at her mother as though trying to remember which one of them was the child. When I touched her shoulder, she'd flinch, then smile with that faraway look. "He's teaching her," she whispered once. "Teaching us." One night, while the wind pressed softly against the house, we all woke at the same moment. No noise had done it. It was the silence that pulled us up. Even the wind had stopped. The air felt dense, alive. And then he was there again. The boring man stood in the doorway, not moving, not breathing, yet somehow vast enough to fill the room. His shape shimmered, bending the edges of everything around him, like a heat wave rising from cold ground. He lifted a hand, if it was a hand, and the old woman sat up, eyes bright and young. "He says it's time," she said. "We can see now." The walls peeled away like smoke. Outside wasn't outside anymore. It was a wide plain of shifting color, folding in and out of itself. Streams of light ran across the air like rivers seen from far above. I felt the weight of every moment I'd ever lived, each heartbeat stacked together. And then, they all began to unstack, sliding away until I couldn't tell which version of me was the real one. The boring man turned to my wife. She smiled as if she'd been waiting for this. "He's showing us what's underneath," she said softly. Her voice echoed strangely, coming before her lips moved. I tried to grab her hand, but my fingers passed through as though time itself had thinned. The air shimmered, and for a moment I saw us, millions of us, standing in that same place in countless versions of the same room. Some of the rooms were empty, some were dust. In one, the boring man wasn't there at all, and the silence was unbearable. Then everything folded again. When I opened my eyes, I was on the sofa. The house looked the same, but the colors were dull, like a photograph left in the sun too long. My wife sat beside me. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The world outside the window barely moved, the trees frozen in mid-sway, the clouds painted in place. Her mother was in the armchair, humming. She looked peaceful, eyes closed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "We saw too much," my wife said after a long while. "Now there's nothing left to see," I nodded. The words made sense in a way that frightened me. The clock on the wall ticked once, then stopped. Now we just sit here most of the time. The light changes, but we don't feel the hours pass. Sometimes I think I hear the tune again, drifting through the still air. And for a second I see a shimmer at the edge of the room, like the outline of someone patient and waiting. Maybe he never left. Maybe we didn't. Either. Everything is quiet now. Perfectly, endlessly quiet.